Your personal brand is important for recruiting tech and entrepreneurs for Greylock and among other ventures. Do you worry about having to perform all the time? I mean, like right now, for example, be on?
Well, I don't so much think about it from a brand management perspective, is that I try to respect people's time and so forth. So what I care about is, can I say something compact and interesting quickly? So I do switch on, but it's not a switch on from a defensive point of view as much as, like if you think sports, offense, defense, it's not so much from a defense point of view as much as it is from an offense point of view. Like, let's make it interesting. Right. Let's have something really good happen, as opposed to the, well, you know, brand's one of those important things you have to do sometimes, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wondered, because around here, this is, as you know, in Silicon Valley, people will go, I saw Mark Zuckerberg eating a sandwich here once. We should go there. And I'm like, he's not going to be there again. Also, that was 10 years ago. The kid hasn't eaten a sandwich here without 17 bodyguards since '05. Like, come on. So I just thought, like, oh, if people are walking up to you and Michelle, like, hey, Reid, love LinkedIn, or whatever people do as fanning in Silicon Valley.
Even last night, I was having dinner with a friend of mine at the Rosewood, and someone walked over and said, are you Reid Hoffman? And I used to say no, because I was trying to get a preserve of privacy. Now I say yes, and then they say, oh, I really love your podcast, Master Scale. And, oh, great, thank you. You know, nice to meet you. Because it's, you know, it's, for them, it's an expression of shared joy, and you should respect that. And so I've now kind of gone to, okay, that's what happens.
That's fair. So it's less I've given up on privacy and more, hey, I created something that people enjoy. I shouldn't shun that attention.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's a lot of people in similar positions to you that have pretty much said, I can't have privacy. And it actually, that sort of mindset, I think, makes them a little bit annoyed and sad. So embracing it is probably a better strategy.
And realize that when someone's coming up to you to talk to you, they're doing so because they go, I love this thing, right? And you're like, great, thank you. It's a gift from you.
Yeah, that's true. I guess if you're in the NBA and you just lose a big game, you're like, what's this person want right now? But you don't. You've kind of got to. You're in a nice sort of innocuous niche where somebody would really have had to have a very specific problem with something you did in order to have a problem.
I have yet to have that encounter.
Knock wood, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You do recommend people build their network early, and I've heard and seen that a lot from you, and it makes sense because you founded LinkedIn, you know, et cetera. But I hear people tell me all the time, because I teach networking on the show, and I even have a little mini course about this that's free, and I'll say, look, it's free because networking will change your life, it'll change your business, it'll make you happier, you'll have friends, your kids will be better, whatever. Every benefit that I've ever had that's big has come from reaching out and connecting with people. And people will say, well, I work at a school, so I don't need this. Or, well, I'm not going to leave my job. I work for the government. I don't need networking. What do you think of that when people say things like that?
Well, so I think we live in a networked age. So I actually think everyone needs a network.
Sure.
And whether or not you're a high school student or whether or not you're a massively successful CEO, the whole range, you need it. It affects what you learn, right? Because what should you be paying attention to? What should your considerations be about how the world's changing, about what do kind of opportunities and threats and possibilities actually all look like? The best place that comes from is your network. Yes, you can Google search, and yes, you can read a lot, and that's nice to do too, but the network helps you learn. And like the clearest way you can say this is that most people, when they go through the university experience and go through the college experience, see, look, you learned a bunch from your classes, you learned a bunch from your professors, but actually, in fact, for almost everyone, the most you learned was from your peers, from the students around you, and that continues through life, and that's what your network is.
Yeah, that's really true. I remember having smart roommates, which was lucky, because it certainly wasn't me going, I need smart roommates. It was guys going, hey, you should live in our house, and it was a bunch of go-getter gunner guys, and I thought, these guys taught me how to study. They taught me about world of events. They taught me how to pay attention to the right kind of news. I didn't know things like some news sources are biased. It's, you know, I'm 19, you don't think about that stuff. But I do vaguely also remember skull shapes of Australopithecines. It's just been less useful in terms of my daily life. Other people, and this is more up your alley, people will say, well, my work is so good, I want it to speak for itself, so I don't need to make connections. And when I go to a VC, they'll go, wow, this idea is amazing. I don't need to network.
So, again, it's people frequently have false dichotomies. It's great to have great work. It's great to have an amazing set of stuff that you've done. That's awesome. And yes, you should have that. But one of the pieces of advice I most often give entrepreneurs is don't just work on the product, work on your go-to-market. Because I build this thing in a corner, no one sees it. It may be the best thing ever, but no one sees it, so it's never used. That's the problem on the entrepreneurship side. The same parallel is true for individuals, which is you may have done all this great work, but the fact that what's awareness of, like, what's other people saying about it? What's the way that you present it? What's the way that people can understand it and get to know it? Because, by the way, it's a huge world. It's 8 billion people, right? How do you stand out against 8 billion people? Actually, in fact, that's kind of challenging.
Yeah, that's a good. Are we at 8 already?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling claustrophobic.
Yes.
Yeah. My gosh. All right. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we're doing the commencement episode of Masters of Scale combined with the Jordan Harbinger show here. So we're going to play clips from Masters of Scale with the amazing entrepreneurs that you've interviewed, and then we'll discuss / poke holes in the concepts in the clips. Here's Daniel Ek, founder of Spotify, on how our passions can influence our business.
It's fair to say we have Sweden to thank for Daniel's lifelong love affair with music. It started with his family.
It's one of those weird families. Like in normal families, you would get a college degree and that would be like the important thing. Not really in our family. In fact, no one had a college degree, but having a music education was super important.
But his country made sure that no child left music behind.
And in Sweden, where I grew up, there's actually free music education, which I think explains a lot about how music is so big in that country and why it's such a big export for us as well. You get taken to this place when you're about 4 or 5 years old, and you walk around and you get to sample every instrument you can imagine. So I walked around and I saw people playing piano, I saw people doing the flutes, I saw people doing all sorts of things.
That's the sitar, and this is the glockenspiel.
And in one of the rooms was this person who was playing the drums. And I saw that and I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. I really want to play the drums.
5-year-old Daniel was blown away by the possibilities, but there was one inescapable reality.
My parents, because I wasn't really that into music at that time, nor did I really want to do it, they said, you can pick any instrument you want. I said I wanted to play the drums. They said, well, any instrument you want, but the drums, because we were living in an apartment and we didn't want to get evicted.
Daniel turned to a cool older cousin for advice.
He had told me that I should pick the guitar, because if I picked the guitar, I could actually have a shot with the girls. And as a 5-year-old, I didn't know what have a shot with the girls actually meant. I thought he was a pretty cool guy, so I ended up playing guitar. And that's the story of how I started picking up the guitar.
And so when did you start picking up programming? And then was there any connection between music and programming at that time?
No, it wasn't really any connection between the two. It was a C64.
The C64 is also known as the Commodore 64. It was an 8-bit home computer, popular in the 1980s.
With a cassette?
Yes, with the cassettes, indeed. And then one day the cassette broke. The actual player broke down. So I started deconstructing the player and figured out how to fix it. Next time the computer broke down, I took it apart and then put it back together again and fixed it. Got a bit overconfident, so I asked someone who was an engineer, what's the hardest thing to learn? And the person said, well, C++ is probably the hardest thing to learn.
C++ is a computer programming language. It is indeed one of the hardest things to learn.
So by age 9, I thought, hey, I'm going to learn how to program C++. And about 40 pages of code later, I could construct a mouse cursor that moved around, which felt like a lot of work for something relatively simple.
Music was something Daniel's family was clearly really passionate about. And you hear that actually quite a bit about Swedish kids. I guess they just have a really good public music education there.
Probably.
It's not considered something that you do when your kid just gets into pot here, like it is in America. It turns out he was more passionate about girls, no big surprise, so he picks up the guitar, which is probably good advice to a young Daniel Ek. I do wonder if he ever got the drums now that he's a billionaire. It's like, can finally afford to get the drums and you can live in a house where your neighbors won't complain. One issue that I might take with this advice, though, is he says something akin to follow your passion. It's not quite that simplified, but I find that to be often bad advice because we hear it from successful people, but this is kind of survivor bias where they're successful, they've got a big platform because somebody, Mark Cuban tweeted it or something, right? Not to put him on blast. I'm making that up, but they're also a minority of people. We don't hear from all of these entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs or creators that followed their passion straight into their mom's basement, never to be seen again, essentially. So where do you stand on all this?
So my very first book was called The Startup of You. And part of what I was trying to do is to give people how to say, yes, your passion's important, but you should be paying attention to market realities. You should say, well, what do the opportunities look like? What does competition look like? Do I have a plan for getting there? Do I have the resources for getting there? So I'll follow my passions and my passions will lead me to an amazing career. Lots of people don't work out in the video gaming industry. Lots of people don't work out in Hollywood. Lots of people don't work out, there's just these pools where people get exposed to them when they're in, high school or college or younger, and they go, that's what I want to be. And you're like, yeah, actually, there's millions that go into it, and there's tens or hundreds where it works out. And you have to understand that reality of these things. And so I think it's important to identify your passions. It's important to kind of figure out, all right, which passions are the things that would really trigger it, but also to be, what's the best match for me to what the opportunity landscape looks like?
How do you evaluate that landscape? I mean, that's a very complex question, of course. I mean, if you're really good at it, you work in an office like this with a bunch of partners investing in things, which maybe you're a great person to ask about that. Because I think for me, I would go, 20-year-old me would go, okay, pretty soon this internet thing is going to be everywhere. I have fast internet in my dorm, so I download MP3s. Pretty soon people are going to have this in their home. What advantage can I take out of that? That would be advanced thinking for 2000, 2003. And I remember thinking along the lines of, I had a lot of kind of dumb ideas about that, but they weren't all terrible because one of them turned into Spotify, which of course I have nothing to do with. But I was like, this Napster thing, this guy's onto something, probably gonna get sued into oblivion, but you can't stop this train. It turned out that I would have been right, but I wouldn't have thought to license the music. I would have just thought to move it to China and not get caught.
Yeah. So first part is use your network. And what people mostly mistake is they think, well, if I can get to the head of this record label or something else, that would inform me on this question. Usually we don't have access to that. Usually the question is, well, I have some family, I have some friends, I have some people the friends know, I have some people the family knows. That's my network when I'm young.
Yeah.
But what you do is you go, well, who are the smartest people that know me, that may have a good sense of this, that may be able to connect me with someone that is interesting, that could then give me some sense where I can go, okay, is this a good idea where I have enough of a unique edge, I could pick up some momentum, I could run an experiment with it. And the questions to ask the network. So first is not just ask the people you know, but ask them if they know someone who'd be useful to talk to. Second is the questions you ask them is, what's wrong with this idea? Not, do you like this idea?
Right, because they'll go, yes, I do.
Yeah, you seem nice.
You're
I want to be
smart.
supportive. Yeah, it's great. No, what could go wrong? Right. What if this fails? Why would it fail? Right. And then so you're getting a sense of that because you go, okay, I think I can navigate that stuff. So network, one key component. Another one is, and this is again from like my book Startup Review, I have this framework called ABZ planning, which is you have a plan A, you have plans B, which is how to think about like, well, if A is not working out, maybe B will work, or maybe B would be a different path, or that kind of thing. And then you have a Z plan, which is, it's not working out at all. What's my lifeboat plan? I'm going to row to a different set of plan A and plan Bs. So having that as a planning framework, and if you can build that planning framework around your particular idea, maybe your passion and so forth, you go, okay, I'm respecting the fact that I'm going to change. I'm going to change. The world's going to change. I'm going to learn new things. I'm going to figure out, oh yeah, 3,000 people who are in better positions have this music idea than I do, and this isn't going to work. I need to change. Then you can keep moving and you can keep playing forward. So like having a flexible planning framework that accounts for your changes in your knowledge, and your changes in the way the world, the market is working are all really critical.
That's really solid advice. Thank you. I know Daniel was really young when he started his first business, which I think leads people to maybe get a little discouraged. He was also very young though when he started skill stacking. So he learned music, he learned programming because he got, as in his words, kind of cocky and was like, what's the hardest thing to learn? I would love to hear that story. Jason, this is clip 4, Daniel Eck. I think what worries a lot of people when they hear things like this is they hear of literal children or teenagers and they go, I can't do anything big. I'm too late. I'm 23 or I'm 43. I didn't learn C++ when I was 8.5 or whatever, how old he was. I missed the personal computer and internet explosion. And guys like me who were right there and obsessed with computers at the time, but just didn't do anything with them, it's easy for us to go, damn it, I was so early and I just squandered that advantage. How much of success, especially at scale, comes down to timing?
There's always luck, there's always timing. And so part of the thing to say, to compare yourself to a Bill Gates, a Mark Zuckerberg, et cetera, is frankly foolishness, right? Because there's a bunch of people, they're enormously brilliant, talented, grit-driven people. But there's other people who also have those characteristics, and it comes down to, look, were you in the right place at the right time? Did you realize that opportunity? Did you pursue it? How did the competition work out? How did the stuff work out? So there's always a range that comes from serendipity. It's one of the reasons why having a flexible planning approach, planning for risks, like thinking what could go right, what could go wrong, navigating across that landscape of what you're doing is really important general strategy. Now, that being said, my general belief is that in most circumstances, especially places where we're lucky to be, the US, other places, where you could say, well, I always can make opportunity. I can actually make the opportunity. It may be much harder for me than it was for someone who is sitting in Silicon Valley or was for someone in an elite college, but it's doable. I can do it. And it may require 2x the work, 3x the work, 4x the work. That's what happens. It's still better than being in the Congo, like an area where it's war-torn and terrible and so forth. And sometimes you're just like, well, you just got to move. Right? You just got to try to get out. So I think that that opportunity is always there. And look, the game is not so much, can I be one of the heroes that's written about in the next 100 years? Sometimes that happens. That's almost always a healthy dose of serendipity and luck. But the game is, can I do something that where I started from, I can make something interesting. I can do something where people say, well, yeah, you went from there to there, and that's pretty impressive. And that's the game that's in front of all of us.
It's tricky because I think we often move the goalposts on ourselves, and I'm wondering if someone in your position does this. So for me, grew up in Michigan, mom's a school teacher, dad was an engineer at Ford. Pretty common story for a Detroiter. And then it's like, oh, your son went to Michigan. Oh, he went to law school. Oh, he moved to New York and then California, and he's got this business on the internet that nobody understands. I don't know what a podcast is, right? I'm going to be hearing that until I'm 50 or beyond. But then it's like, oh, well, it's great that I have this big interview podcast, but what I should have done is started Facebook or Spotify, especially living here. You just go, wham, I'm not a billionaire. This is my life is unfair or something. And I wonder if people who are in your position go, dang, I should have started a rocket company, and then I could have started an electric car company, or I could have started this giant other thing. What's wrong with me? I, only started LinkedIn and work at this amazing firm.
I think that's a common human condition. So okay. I think there are a number of highly wealthy, highly successful people who are like, wait, I could still be better. And I think the key thing is to not measure yourself really relatively to other people other than to figure out how to do better. Like, it's not a question of which of us is better in the league rankings, which of us made more money, which of us has more mentions on the internet, in some kind of positive sense. Like if you get wrapped up in that game, you're not playing your own game. You're not playing the games well, who are you? What impact do you want to have in the world and in life? What do you stand for? What makes you you? And so it's worth paying attention to other people and what they're learning and how they're doing and how you could do better, but only for how you could do better. And so I do think across the whole spectrum, the goalposts move, and that people go, well, now I want to play this game in order to be the bigger, more important person in some registration of that. But I actually think that it's very good to learn as early as you can, you're playing your own game, right? And what success looks like is, well, what's your measurement for success? What's your sense of well, this is a life worth leading, right? Like this is what I want to have been known for, and this is what I want to do. And so, and part of how you know that is who are the people that you respect, and what would they think? Yeah, that was great, right? That's important.
So it's important to realize the goalposts might move, but if you use that to challenge yourself and sharpen your skill set, great. But if you use it to beat yourself up, you're just going to beat yourself up until you're dead.
Yes.
Which is kind of like, I teeter between those two things, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I think most people probably do.
I think it's good to always, like in the Startup Review, we have this concept permanent beta, which is you're always learning, you're always changing. So I think it's good to have that and have that always be learning, always be stretching yourself. Oh yeah, I got here. Well, now maybe I can get here. That's a good impulse. But the notion is to say, also reflect on, well, I'm doing some good stuff, right? And by the way, sometimes doing some good stuff is you helped out one of your friends. That's great, right? I mean, so really take pride in the things also that you're doing that are contributing well.
Easier said than done for some of us, but I think also some of the drive that makes people really good at whatever it is they're doing, it's almost cliche, is the same thing that's making them miserable personally, right?
Yes.
Like the tortured artist is one thing, but we see the tortured entrepreneur who's like, I only have 100 million users, I'm never gonna amount to anything.
Yeah.
Or this is failing because we're going through our burn rate is so high. And yet, I mean, even things like PayPal, it's like, is this really gonna do anything? Is this gonna be successful? And then it was.
Yeah. And by the way, I think it's that balance. It's worth owning that sense of, well, I want to be more. Like own it, right? And go, but don't own it in a way that you're making it less true that you'll get there, and making it in a way that your part of life is to have some joy in the good things you're doing. Make sure you experience that.
Marissa Mayer, in our next clip, is famous for, among other things, being an early employee at Google and the CEO of Yahoo, and especially for making her decisions based on a ton of data. Let's hear an example of her process here and how she ended up selecting a job at Google.
Marissa herself is one of Silicon Valley's more famous names. She joined Google as employee number 20 and their first female engineer. After 13 years at Google, she moved on to become Yahoo's 8th and final CEO. But we're going to start at the beginning. Marissa was still a college student, and Google was one of 1,000 teeny Silicon Valley startups competing for talent.
Due to a long-distance relationship and a bad bowl of pasta, I was in my dorm room on a Friday night, and I told myself, if anyone else mails you about another job, like you just have to pick. You have 13 good offers, like you just have to pick one.
At just that moment, another email popped up on Marissa's screen. The subject line was just 3 words: work at Google.
He came in late on this Friday night, and it said, like, work at Google. And I remember looking down and being like, this bowl of pasta is so bad, and I am so pathetic that I'm here on a Friday night eating bad pasta.
Remember, this is 1999, the peak of the dot-com bubble. Stanford grad students were showered with offers from tech recruiters. Marissa assumed she was just being spammed. She hit delete, or at least she meant to.
But I accidentally hit the space bar, which in my email reader program opened the message. So I looked back up and it was open, and I realized it was actually an email from Salar Kamangar, another early Googler, who said, I've been talking to different professors at Stanford about who I should be talking to that's graduating. Your name came up.
Salar Kamangar, the Googler who sent that email, was Google employee number 9, for those keeping count. He's now senior vice president of YouTube. Now Marissa had another offer, 14 to choose from. It's the kind of problem most new grads wish they had. How did she decide? Methodically. Marissa enlisted help from Andre Vanier, a fellow Stanford student who is now a VP at Oath.
I went up to his apartment in San Francisco and said, okay, I've got all these offer letters, and we pulled all the values for all of the different columns off of these offer letters. So, salary, stock, where it was, career trajectory, promotion ability, happiness quotients.
They drew up charts and plotted graphs. They buried their heads in the numbers. After 6 hours churning data, Marissa looked up to see the sun had set. Her head was spinning, and she felt no closer to a decision.
Andre just loves working on problems like that. And turned to me, he's like, well, this has been really fun. And he's like, thank you so much for involving me in this. And I was like, but I haven't made a decision. And I was like, this hasn't been fun for me at all. I'm completely overwhelmed. So he's like, go to bed, sleep on it. The first thing you think of tomorrow morning, whether you can articulate it or not, that's the right decision. And so that is how I ultimately picked Google. I went to sleep I woke up the next morning and I just wanted to work at Google for a lot of the reasons I could articulate, and for a bunch of other reasons that were harder to articulate. Like the fact that I felt like the smartest people were there, and I felt really unprepared to try and do what they wanted to do overall as a company, right? They were really ambitious. And for all those reasons, I picked it.
Marissa is well known for her intense use of data when she makes decisions. Indeed, it has been the target of much criticism. But what people overlook is that she's not making choices based solely on the data she collects. Each table of data she builds is like a diving board. The higher she builds it, the wider the view, and the bigger the splash when she jumps. But whether she actually takes that dive or not, that's still based on intuition.
I like to be really data-driven, but I don't ignore sort of the human instinct element of it, which, for me, my process is a lot of times roll around in the data, get to know and really understand it really well, and then make a gut-based call, which is often supported by data and a lot of hard to articulate factors as well.
Yeah. Informed intuition is, I actually think, a good way of making decisions.
Totally, yes.
Right. So Marissa took the plunge and became Google employee number 20.
Well, not a bad pick given her career trajectory. But is there such a thing as too much data? We hear about analysis paralysis and things like that. How do we strike a balance?
So there is almost always too much data. And part of what you have to think about is, what are the key things that would change my decision? Not let me integrate all of the information, because then you get overwhelmed with it.
Sure.
And by the way, that overwhelming can actually make you have bad decisions. So I'll share, like, for example, one of the frameworks that I tend to utilize a lot, which is you say, okay, this is first priority, this is second priority, this is third priority. So frequently what I'll do is, like, can I make this decision just on first priority, not looking at second or third? Like, what would the decision be if it was just on the first priority? Because, by the way, then it's only the data around that, it's only the things around that. And if you say, well, this would be the decision, then you go, okay, well, why would I allow that to change for any of the other priorities? If that's really the driving priority, then, okay, maybe that should be the decision. I should tune it a little bit to respect these other interests, these other goals, these other needs. But that should be what I'm going to do. And that's one of the ways to simplify the set of data, because you go, what is the really, really key thing? Because the problem about, like, the only thing that I find personally useful about doing the process that is the exhaustive, like here I did the entire table, I did the entire spreadsheet. And some people who are deeply smart and analytic like Marissa really make that work well. But for me, I'm just looking for this is the one question that matters. And once I figure out that question, that's the decision. And that's it, right? And so I think that's important. The other thing that is important is, how do you set your goals the right way in terms of how do you evaluate the data within it? And I find that people make very commonly one of two mistakes. It's almost like the Goldilocks mistake in goal setting. So they either go, what's my next step? It's like, what's my passion? What's my next step? I should only evaluate on the next step. And you're like, well, but actually, in fact, you have this whole career and whole life in front of you. If you evaluate only on the next step, you're going to have a problem. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, they go, well, I want to be a hedge fund manager. Like, this is the thing I want to do. Like, this is the thing. And so this is like, 15 years out. And you're like, well, don't you think you're going to learn some things? Don't you think you might change? Don't you think you might be going along this path and realize you have this other great opportunity? So saying that's the only thing. So frequently what I do is I say, the way of decisioning is I think of it as a two-step decisioning process, by which you go, integrate into this step, what is my changing landscape of possibility on the second step? Not where I'm going to be 20 years from now, but like, how does that landscape change in a way that's really good for me? It's a good fit for my skills, a good fit for my passions, a good fit for what the market needs and opportunities, and do that. So you integrate those two. Now, when you're only doing that, the amount of data is a much more compact set of data.
Yeah, interesting. Marissa also mentioned informed intuition. And I'm wondering, how do we know when we're informing our intuition with data versus just like procrastinating because but there's more data over there. Maybe there's something in there that will inform my intuition, AKA never pulling the trigger on anything.
So
it might be the same answer, but it might not be.
Well, there's an additional thing I can say, which is one of the things I learned from startups is when I'm operating in what I think of as quick time, when I'm confronted with a decision, I say, what would my decision right now be? If I had to make the decision right now, I don't get any more data. This is the data I have. This is what the decision would be. Then because I go, okay, what are the key things that might change my decision? So I need to talk to Jordan. I need to talk to, Sarah. I need to talk to, or I need to find out if this is true or not, right? Like this thing. Great. Do I have the time frame and the ability and the cost to go do those things? Okay, let me go get those specific things and then inform this decision. And that's a way of trying to say, what's the minimum set of data that I need to make, were sometimes very massive decisions. Like it could be are we gonna launch product A and work on product A, or product B? Are we gonna raise money from person X or person Y? Like huge decisions.
Yeah.
But you could still kind of make it really compact. And that's one of the ways to do it. And so one of your tests is not, because you could always say, well, more data is useful. The test is, what's the minimum set of data that you would actually, in fact, make this decision on?
Right, so it's almost like gut check first, and then that gut check or intuition says, okay, as long as we find out that that's really the market size and that this is really going to cost this, we should do it. As opposed to, let's gather the pattern of seagull migration in Idaho at this time of year and then see if that affects our decision.
Or talk to everyone.
Right, talk to we need 6 months of studying. Like that's how the government makes decisions,
yes.
right? Yeah, but it's not good for business.
Yes. Or for individuals.
Or for individuals, right? Especially not for individuals. There are people that are still trying to figure out, whatever, we can go down that road another time. Mark Pincus, founder of Zynga, aka the Farmville people, if we're keeping track, he has some good points in this next clip. He's essentially telling us that we need to know how to kill our ideas and know when to give up on something. Let's hear it.
It's pretty amazing if you think about it that I started one of the first 3 social networks in 2003, and I managed to fail. At a time when everything worked, I actually managed to fail.
I think Mark is being too hard on himself. It's true that 2003 was a banner year for social networks. MySpace, Tribe, LinkedIn, High5, Friendster the year before, Facebook the year after. Of those, only half are still around today.
The lesson from Tribe that came resoundingly out for me and still stands out, that as entrepreneurs, part of the journey that we're on is learning how to separate our winning instincts from our losing ideas. I think as a rule of thumb, if you're a good entrepreneur, you can assume that your instincts are right 95% of the time and your ideas might be right 25% of the time.
I'm not as certain as Mark when it comes to fixing percentages on things as hard to pin down as instincts and ideas. But I do believe in being able to recognize a winning instinct is an essential part of being an entrepreneur. And I certainly agree with Mark that you can expect to see a very high mortality rate among your ideas, even if the instinct behind them is right. In the case of Tribe, Mark was pursuing 3 instincts that, separately, would indeed turn out to be spot on. His instinct that real-name social networking would be huge was borne out by Facebook. His belief in the power of smaller sub-community forums, powered by reputation, found form in Reddit. While creating a better way to find jobs and showcase your professional talents, why, that's LinkedIn. But his idea to pursue all of these instincts with one product was wrong.
I persisted with one losing idea, which was, what if we mashed all these things together? And I got a bunch of the components of that wrong, and I stubbornly persisted with it. I enabled anybody to connect with anybody. And what I got wrong was that mass market people did not feel comfortable sharing everything with strangers.
Mark needed to kill the extreme openness of Tribe if he wanted to attract more mainstream users and take advantage of the big opportunity. But he could not bring himself to deliver the killing blow.
The idea of Tribe wasn't right. And rather than failing fast so that you get a lot of shots on goal, we stoically, stubbornly, heroically stuck to our one idea the entire time.
It was this bitter experience with Tribe that reawakened the killer in Mark.
Out of that, for me, came this mentality that I brought into Zynga of I'm not wedded to any idea, whether it's mine, yours, someone else's. I'll try anything and I'll kill anything and I'll kill it quickly. And I'm not going to let killing an idea kill a winning instinct.
What I like most about this idea is that, especially as entrepreneurs, and this goes for creators of any kind as well, we need to separate our winning intuition or instincts from our losing ideas. He seems pretty confident about the percentages of him being 95% right in terms of intuition or instincts and 25% right in terms of ideas. I don't know how you track on that, but I love this concept because it's really easy to go, well, that idea didn't work. I'm clearly not cut out for this. I'm an idiot. I'm never going to get it right.
So part of what I think is really good about Mark's framework here is there are times you're wrong with intuition and you need to actually correct for that. But frequently, one test of the intuition does not tell you, right? You actually have to test through a sequence of ideas. Mm-hmm. And what it allows you to do is acknowledge you might be wrong about this. Like where people frequently go wrong is they go, I'm so right about the intuition, this idea must work, and I keep working at that idea until I literally drive the bus off the cliff, mm-hmm. right? And you're like, no, bad idea. You need to pivot earlier. You need to figure it out. And so actually, in fact, for one piece, it gives you the psychological space to say, well, maybe this idea is wrong. And maybe I should abandon this idea. And it's very hard when you're the author of the idea. You go, well, but that's my value. That's my idea. That's my value. Like that's the thing I have that's unique from everyone else. And you're like, no, you're going to sometimes have, more often than not, greater than 50% of the time, you're going to have to give up on that idea, right? And that's hard for people. And that's one thing that's really useful about, Mark's break of, kind of a winning intuition versus a potentially losing idea. The other thing that I like about it is that part of how I advise people when they think about macro pivots and changes is you kind of measure what your idea flow is. And so you go, well, in order to make this intuition work, I've got this idea. I've got idea 1, I've got idea 2, I've got idea 3, I've got idea 4. And part of how you go, well, maybe that intuition's wrong, is you go, okay, so I've now tried 5 ideas. Is my 6th idea as good or better than the average or the kind of set of the 5 ideas? Or am I now in a substantially worse ideas than I had before, right? And now the idea, because you can say, no, I'm now kind of scraping at the bottom of the barrel for the ideas to make the intuition work. And that's when you pivot the intuition. That's when you may say, I tried 5 different ideas, doesn't really work. I'm now going to go for a different intuition.
That's actually really useful because I think most of us are so ready to throw out or actually either hold on with a death grip or throw out an idea and then just think, well, I don't have what it takes, or this can't be done, or since I did this wrong, everything I do, I'm going to be making a similar mistake. And we might not have those thoughts consciously, but it's kind of hard to shake, especially if you really get your butt handed to you by mentors, peers of the market, or whoever. You might just think, okay, I'm going to go work at Target.
And an additional point that's really important, and I think we may get to this later too, but it's always like oriented, always get back in the game and keep playing. It's part of the grit point, right? Now, the point of that doesn't mean always keep trying to do the same thing until it totally crushes you. Sure. You need to pivot and change, but staying in the game is part of how you win.
It seems clear now that never give up is pretty terrible advice, but it's advice we hear all the time. Actually, I think the people who say follow your passion follow that with and never give up.
Yeah.
It's almost like they just looked at a bunch of Hallmark cards and were like, I need a keynote speech. But how do we know when to give up on the idea itself? Yeah, if the market kills us, maybe, but or a company may be a better question. How do we know when that time is where we go, look, pivot is not going to do it. 5 degrees to the left is not going to do it. This needs to be nuked because we need to take our ball and put our resources somewhere else.
Well, the framework I use for this is the same framework I just outlined, which is what you do is you say, I got a plan A, right? That's kind of idea 1 for this. And then it's not working and I'm adjusting maybe what my goals are. I'm adjusting what I'm doing. Those are kind of ideas 2, 3, 4. But as you begin to realize that on this path, the ideas that you're testing and aren't working are getting worse and worse, you want to pivot early.
Okay.
Right, so part of what the key is the mistake that people make is they go, oh, when the company is shutting down, now I pivot. And you're like, no. You actually want to be asking yourself the question, should I pivot? And you want to ask that question before the market hits you in the face with a 2x4. Mm-hmm. And that's true as an individual too. You're kind of going, you shouldn't be going, I get to the end of a decade and I go, I really should have done something different 9 years ago. that's a mistake.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Me learning all this Symbian programming instead of iOS turned out not a good future-proofed idea.
But what you do is, if you're good and rigorous about asking yourself the question, call it every year and going, well, do I now have more confidence or less confidence in the path that I'm in? And I'm testing, I'm talking to my network, I'm asking about it. Because by the way, sometimes a test is, hey, do you think the Symbian thing is going somewhere? And you go, oh, I hear from a bunch of smart people, I don't think it's going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Okay, what do I really know something they don't? Which I might. Sometimes that's the bold thing. But consider trying to get to your pivots early, and think everyone pivots. The view, because this is the whole survivor's bias thing that you just talked about, is everyone loves to tell these narratives of, well, when I was 2, I knew what I was going to do when I was 40.
Yeah, it sounds good.
And it was a straight line that was kind of smooth sailing. The wind was at our backs. It was kind of unproblematic. It's always fiction. That's not true. Everyone pivots. So you can think, I'm going to be pivoting too. So let me pivot intelligently and early. That doesn't mean you don't have persistence. That doesn't mean you don't try the hard thing a couple of times every so often. But you're knowing that pivoting is part of the game.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it's not defeat. You're merely steering the boat to get to the port in the right direction.
Exactly.
Nobody says, well, I had to make a left turn, so I lose.
Yes.
You're not supposed to get, what is that like sort of momentum game at a bar where you have to throw the little cartridge and it has to land in the exact specific spot? I guess it looks like curling on salt.
Yes.
This analogy's gone to hell. Let's just go to the next clip. When Instagram first launched, it was mostly just a camera app with some network features. And I know I'm just totally de-romanticizing the idea, and I'm doing that on purpose here. It arguably still is kind of like that. But what we'll see in this next clip is that the initial explosion in users came in large part because of filters, which I don't even know how to use, admittedly. But the founder, Kevin Systrom's wife, actually came up with this idea. Here's the clip.
Kevin wished he could take credit for it, but he says it was actually his wife's idea. It came to them during a trip to Mexico.
We rented a little room in a bed and breakfast, and I was working on bourbon at the time, and we were pivoting to photos, but she was like, I don't think I'm going to ever use this app. I was like, why not? She's like, well, my photos aren't good. And I was like, well, that's fine. Like, you can post photos. It'll be good. And she goes, well, they're not as good as your friend Greg's. And I was like, well, Greg filters all his photos. And she looks at me and she's like, well, you should add filters then. I was like, you're right. I should add filters.
I hear stories like Kevin and Nicole's all the time. Entrepreneurs take note. An honest partner is always your best source of ideas. Kevin was smart enough to listen.
I went back to the bed and breakfast room, and with a dial-up connection in Mexico, of all places, I was looking up code on how to change colors in photos. And I made the first filter there on the spot. And it's still in the app called X Pro 2.
X Pro 2 was one of the 11 original filters that Instagram launched with. Each of the distinctive filters added the kind of blurred edges, color wash, and light leaks that gave even mediocre photos a sense of nostalgic meaning. And when Instagram launched, there were a lot of mediocre photos. Phone cameras were still primitive.
Any person we gave it to, their eyes lit up because they were like, oh, like my photos seem so much better now. And that was the moment when we realized we think we have something.
Filters were the simple feature that set Instagram apart. But Instagram also made it simple to share those beautiful photos. And this was its true secret to scale.
And I remember hearing from people, they were like, whoa, I just got a like. And I was like, yeah, because it's network. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize it. I thought it was just a camera app.
Instagram was an insta hit. On its first day in the App Store, 25,000 downloads. Within a week, 100,000. Within 10 weeks, 1 million users. Instagram had entered multiplayer mode.
So an honest partner is almost always the best source of ideas, or often the best source of ideas. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, there's lots of reasons. So one is they have a certain amount of objectivity. So they don't have their own ego as invested in, oh no, this is brilliant, this is the exact right thing, etc. So they can both see the potential strengths and the weaknesses in a clear way. Second is that they have an investment in trying to help you. So they can say, look, I'm trying to help you get to the better place, whether it's double down or change or pivot. And the third is they have a communications channel that you trust. You trust this person. You trust their interest in you. So that partner, and by the way, this part of the meaning of life is seek out those people. It isn't just your spouse, etc., but it's your friends, your allies. Seeking that out is super critical. And those people, that it's more than gold, it's more than diamonds, it's more than platinum. Those are the people that not only give meaning to your life, but also help you steer.
How do you find those people? Of course, it's a matter of filtering, I would imagine. You meet 100 people and one of them turns out to be a great board member for your personal life. Do you have any specific ways where you go, this person is I really want to spend more time with them. They are sharp.
So first is, lots of people have interesting perspectives and interesting experience in various different ways. And the dimension could be knowledge of the world, knowledge of an industry, knowledge of what's going on here locally, their own networks of who the people they know, the kinds of things that, there's just lots and lots of knowledge in different things. And so the first thing is to realize that, the vast majority of people you meet have something of value and figuring out what that is. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is of value. So for example, I meet a great artist and I go, oh, this person really understands how we order our perceptions. And they're the person I want to ask about that. I wouldn't go ask them about an investment in a company. They just wouldn't know it. It wouldn't be useful. Right? It kind of puts them in an awkward spot and so forth. So you have a whole massive network of potential advisors that it's good to map to. Then what happens when you get say, well, who are the people that are the best kind of inner circle guides for you? Well, those are people who are, generally speaking, somewhat balanced in their own self. So when they're giving you advice, they actually see you in giving the advice. They don't go, well, if I was in your shoes, I would want to do X. It's well, but you're not in my shoes. I'm in my shoes. Right? And we have different goals. We have different interests. We have different risk tolerances. We have different kind of the ways that we play and what we're willing to do. And so people who go, look, I see you and I at least know you some, and I care about you and I care about what the right outcomes for you. And so, by the way, I'm willing to tell you the hard things. Look, I know you have your heart set on this acting career. It's probably not going to work out, right? It's a really long, hard path for you. And I know that you may get angry with me because I'm trying to help you this way, and I'm going to try to do it in the warmest possible, most compassionate way in order to make it happen, because I want to show that I care for you and when I'm doing that, and I'm paying attention to it. So those are the kinds of people that you want to be most close in. And yes, they may have some expertise, some knowledge about the world. They may be super smart. All those things are useful attributes. But their ability to stay true to being an ally with you is the really key characteristic around that inner circle.
Do you find that some of us maybe have partners with terrible ideas or partners that are too close to the project and we go, okay, they're telling me this and I should probably not listen to them?
It is almost always the case that you will have some of that. And the way that I do that is I go, okay, what do I think I know that they don't? And so I get crisp on it. Like they may be close to it. I may think that they're being led by their own bias. I maybe think that they have something like an emotional decision or something else, or a passion decision that is biasing their decision. And I may believe all that. That's great. But the discipline you get to when you say, well, this person's close and they're smart and they're saying this. Okay, what do I think that I know that they don't? And can I articulate to myself that with some degree of precision? And if I do that, then I can feel comfortable going, okay, I'm going to not follow their advice. I'm going to have heard it. I'm going to put it in the memory bank, but I'm going to go, well, I'm going to continue on this course of action.
Yeah. You hear that, Mom? It's nothing personal.
Yes.
I think actually that's a random accidental example. People who are really close to us often want to protect us.
Yes.
So they say things like, ooh, if he goes and tries to start this company and fails, he's going to cry and he's going to be upset and then he's going to move back in our basement. You know, you're doing really well at the police department. Why don't you just stay there? And it's not in your best interest, but it's also playing it safe because they don't want to see you fall on your face.
Yes.
It's not naysaying. They're trying to protect you.
Yes. It's out of love. Mm-hmm. But by the way, the majority, it isn't whether or not you take risk or not. We almost always take risk in everything. Even staying at the police department is actually taking risk. It's a question of taking the smart risks. And this also gets down to the competencies of advice giving. Because if you realize that every path involves some risks and it's risk trade-offs, then you go, okay, so how do we trade it off? And that's part of the reason why the ABZ planning framework, because you go, well, look, you could move back in the basement. That's fine. And then we help you get the confidence to go out in the world again. And we all going to agree to do that. Like you could say, look, the conversation is, if you start this company, you do this thing, it may not work out. Do you have a plan for if it doesn't work out? And so, well, my plan is I move back to the basement. Okay, great. You're going to move back to the basement. We will actually, in fact, do that. Do you have a plan of how you get out of the basement? Like, what are you going to do then? And are you going to have the energy and the dedication, the wherewithal to do that? And the person says, yes, I will. Okay, great. Take the risk.
Speaking of grit, this next clip comes by way of an entrepreneur of my hometown of Detroit, Michigan. Stacy Brown-Philpot is the CEO of TaskRabbit, and she learned grit pretty early in the game while growing up. Let's have a listen.
I grew up on the west side of Detroit. It wasn't the best neighborhood. It wasn't the worst neighborhood, but people looked out for each other. Of course, later on, things got worse for a lot of people very, very fast, but it was home for me.
The Motor City was struggling as the auto industry's engine faltered and died. Times were tough. Communities were devastated by unemployment and despair. Stacy got an unflinching look at this reality from her very first job, the paper route. Stacy shared hers with her older brother.
We would deliver the papers in the mornings, and then on the weekends, we had to go collect from people. And of course, there was always people who didn't want to pay. So I had to make sure we got paid.
And how old were you then?
Oh, I was about 10 years old.
And so how did you get people to pay?
Well, you just knock on their door a lot and often, and then you kind of watch when people's cars would pull up and see them going in the house, and you'd run out and catch them before they close the door.
Where's my money?
And then I'm 10, so of course they're gonna look at me and say, I need to give Stacy her money. Yeah. But sometimes they just wouldn't answer the door if they didn't have it, so you have to watch people when they go into their house.
Most people would agree that stiffing a 10-year-old girl out of her paper route money is a jerk move. But Stacy wasn't deterred.
Some people would see us and it's like 4 degrees outside, and they would just give us that extra $1. And that just meant so much, because I know it came from people who didn't have a whole lot of money, but they were proud of us for doing real work, good work, legal work in a community where a lot of people did illegal work to make money. And so I think that helped inspire me probably later on, that like if you do good work for good people, it'll pay off.
But there was a less sentimental reason that drove Stacy to lug heavy bags of paper through freezing Detroit streets.
I like to buy candy.
Well, I think that's universal amongst 10-year-olds. There's a use for this money. It's called candy.
Exactly.
Cash equals candy. It's a fun equation you learn as a kid. But Stacy learned some tougher lessons too.
I would say that my upbringing in Detroit taught me grit. It taught me about not just the cold weather, but there's a community that needs to thrive and you need to figure out a way.
I've noticed that many successful people, not just CEOs and entrepreneurs, they have a lot of resilience. They do have a lot of grit. And there are books about this. It's almost, I don't want to say buzzwordy because it cheapens it, but it's trending right now, especially around here. But if we didn't grow up selling newspapers in below freezing Michigan winters and getting stiffed by our elderly customers running into the house to avoid paying, how do we go about developing some grit as adults? I think a lot of people write into my inbox and they'll go, hey, I'm 25 and I'm now realizing I've never had it hard at all. Can I actually accomplish great things? Because my parents did a great job raising me. I have good values. I'm kind of a hard worker. But the second someone's like, nah, I don't want to hire you, I go into my shell or I feel defeated completely. How do we develop this? Where do we start?
So I think grit, some of us have a more natural predisposition for it. Some of us don't. It's a nature, but it's always nature plus nurture. So I think grit can be learned. The principal way is anytime that you run into a difficult circumstance, realize it's a learning opportunity. Realize that it's like, this is where I can learn grit. This is where I can go, okay, I pick myself up, I dust myself off, and I do it again. And we've all encountered it, at least in minor ways. Like you play sports when you're in school, you try your hand at art and you're a terrible painter.
Yeah.
We actually, in fact, and you go, okay, I pick myself up, I keep going. And what you do is you say, it's something to learn, it's something to get better at. It's the same way as, can I express myself in language? Can I pick out a good outfit? Can I, like it's the same thing. Everyone can learn it. And it doesn't mean that everyone can learn it to be Olympic level. That's like, it's a whole spectrum on this. But you can learn it to be better, and it's super important because basically where things really get tragic is where you take yourself out of the game. You stop playing. And that's you. You decide to do that, right? There are these people in these war-torn regions, Syria, etc., who like literally take life-threatening risks to cross an ocean to try to make a life for themselves and their families. You can take some risk. You can actually have the grit to do it. You just need to say, it's a learning thing. And okay, I fell down. I failed at this. Great, try again.
How do we know if we're learning grit and resilience or we're just punishing ourselves because I'm in pain. If I lean into this, Reid said grit's gonna come out the other side. Resilience is gonna come out the other side.
So what you want to, simply putting your finger continually in the light socket, it's not necessarily a particularly good learning experience. So what you want to be doing is you want to be saying, okay, how am I measuring that I'm learning? And so one of the ways that I do it is I come up with principles. So it isn't just I go, okay, I'll take more pain. I'll go, okay, here's a place where I took the pain. How do I play again where at least if I'm failing again, I'm learning new lessons, right? Like I learned some lessons from that time. So you go, it isn't just like, oh, that was painful. Now I'm going to try again. It's like, what did you learn from it? What did you say? Now I'm going to play differently, right? Like I'm now going to say, okay, next time I take on that challenge, I'm going to get 2 or 3 friends to do it with me. Or next time I'm going to take on that challenge, I'm going to make sure that I've built up some momentum before I get into it. That kind of thing is say, okay, that's what I've learned. And by the way, sometimes you have to relearn because you go, well, that was actually the wrong learning. I now need to adjust that. Fine. But if you have that, then you have confidence that you're making progress. And it isn't just that, well, there's a 20-foot concrete wall and I'm trying to pound my head against it to go through it. And that's never going to work. Your head's going to break before the concrete wall does. But you're going, okay, well, I studied the wall a little bit better. And I said, well, not the concrete wall, the wood wall. I'm going to go after the wood wall. Fine. That's the kind of thing. And if you know that you're learning, you're asking other people, you're trying to figure out what's the way that I do it better, then you're making progress. And grit's one of the things that comes out of it, because part of how you learn grit is you go, well, that was painful and difficult, but then I played again and I did better. Oh, grit's useful, right? And that's how you need to do it.
This next clip is right up my alley, given that what I teach so much on the show and to Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and companies are soft skills. So networking, relationship development, and especially reading between the lines to decipher communication and figure out why people are saying what they're saying. Here, Julia Hartz, the founder and the CEO of Eventbrite, discusses her not-so-favorite customer back from her first job. I think we all have one of these memorable a-holes, if we can use that term, from our past, or depending on where you are in your career, you might even be dealing with one right now. Let's hear it.
Julie was learning to hear what people said and react to it in real time. It's a skill she developed not only in the dance studio, but in all the jobs that would follow. She learned to listen to what people say and then cut to the core of what they actually mean, and she learned fast. Like the time she was working at a local coffee shop.
I was 14 at the Ugly Mug in Santa Cruz, where I grew up. I learned how to make a great latte, but the biggest lesson was this woman would show up at the door at 5:55 a.m. and walk in and yell at me for like a good 15-20 about how bad the coffee was that I was making her. And I would get like a pit in my stomach for the first few weeks. And then I just realized one day she didn't have anyone to talk to. And it wasn't about me, and it's not about the latte,
Yes.
right? So it's
Yes.
like that lesson was one of the most important lessons I've ever learned in my life. I learned it at 14.
It's not about the latte. It's a deceptively simple statement, one that can save you a lot of time and effort if you learn the lesson well. Because what sounds like direct feedback, the kind of feedback that calls for clear action, is often something quite different. If Julie had taken that customer's feedback at face value, she would have tied herself into knots trying to satisfy impossible demands, and she'd never have mastered making a great latte.
I remember thinking, it's not about the latte. You know, you with those people, you're like, wait, they need someone to talk to, and they're not upset about you or it, or it's about something else, right? So you got to kind of like put it into context.
All right, Reid. So what sounds like direct feedback, the kind of feedback that calls for clear action, is often something quite different. Great. How do we know what feedback is direct feedback? And how do we know which is the crazy old lady going ballistic about a perfectly good latte?
So there's two things. So one is integrate data from multiple data points. So for example, you have one person saying, that's a terrible latte, and a bunch of other people are like, oh, great, and they're regulars and they're coming in. Well, you got multiple data points. So the likelihood that that's a terrible latte is much lower. So multiple data points is super helpful. And sometimes it's tricky to get multiple data points or compare apples to apples versus apples to oranges and to make that happen. But multiple data points is very useful. And then also, and this gets to the second point, which is ask your network, right? Ask people, say, oh, I'm having this experience. How should I interpret it? And those folks should be able to say, well, like for example, if I had been friends with a young Julia and said, well, I'll come in, I'll try your latte, I'll tell you what I think. And I'll tell you what I actually think, right? Like I'm not gonna go, oh, it's great. It'll be like, no, I'm trying to help my friend. Oh, this is pretty good. I don't know what the problem is. And by the way, that's how you get a second data point, right? And so the really key thing is to realize that learnings very rarely, occasionally come from one data point. Then you have your network to help you understand it, analyze it, understand what the key learnings are. But frequently it's multiple data points, and then you integrate across them. And that's how you understand.
When we come across this in a work or corporate situation, how should we sort of ask clarifying questions, right? Because if our data point is our boss, we might not want to be like, it's one data point, or if it's the market especially. But let's assume it's a person, and maybe it's our direct supervisor. We probably should investigate this directly with them, don't you think?
Well, so on a boss, yes, look, basically, if you don't have a good relationship with boss, you should be thinking about your next job, and you should be working on it. And this is kind of the pivot early. Like you're like, this doesn't work. Pivot early, right? Now, so it is the kind of thing that you shouldn't let rest. You have a bad relationship with boss. That's not the kind of thing that improves accidentally over time, et cetera. It has to be something to work on. So working on the relationship with the boss, fundamentally a good idea. The second thing is, say you're having a problem with the boss and you're trying to figure out, is it the boss or is it me? Right?
Yeah.
Like, or what combination? That's, again, why network is useful. And network of people who are not going to like, oh yeah, your boss is terrible. I'm your friend, your boss is terrible. That doesn't help you, because you also want to learn, because you go to the next boss and you have the same problem. Right. You're not making progress in your career. You want the people who go, look, I care about you making progress, but I'm going to help you sort out how much of it's you, how much is your boss. What's the issue? Is it a chemistry problem? Is it a your boss's terrible problem? Is it your terrible problem? Because getting back to the first point, your relationship with your boss here will really matter. And if your relationship with boss isn't good, and you can't fix it, move on.
Gotcha. How do you handle this in your marriage? Don't worry, I don't think Michelle's going to listen. Because pivoting early can get messy.
Well, hopefully you've dated for a while.
Yeah.
Right? And hopefully you've gotten a bunch of data from that.
Sure.
Look, I think, part of the thing in marriage, again, is address problems early. Think about getting marriage counseling, for example. So going to saying, hey, we have this difference of opinion on X. Well, let's go find some third party that we both trust and have the conversation and sit down and work through that. And by the way, if you can do that, it makes your marriage much stronger, right? So it's a little bit of don't waste good crises, right? I'm kind of, it's like looking for pivots. Look for the crises, because those can make things much better. And so, one of the things that I tell people is one of the great things about having a crisis in any relationship, including the capital R relationship, is when you get to a crisis, this is an opportunity by which you can actually be stronger. It isn't just a risk, it's also an opportunity. And across my relationship with everyone in my life, I actually look for those and I steer into them to try to make it good and stronger. And by the way, if it turns out that it doesn't become stronger, then maybe it's not the right thing. Maybe it's not the right thing for either of you.
Great. That's a really good answer. That's really, I like the idea of steering into a crisis, because a lot of people go, ooh, this is going to be thorny. I don't really want to deal with this. That's, of course, going to crop up later, along with the other 15 crises that you buried. And then that's how people end up with just
And at that point,
nuclear.
it might not be fixable.
Right. Then it's like, well, you bury all these other problems. Well, I was trying to smooth things over. Yeah, then it's just explosion. Someone leaves the cap off the toothpaste and you're getting shivved.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. This next clip is actually with you, and it centers around one of the lessons you learned playing Dungeons and Dragons, which I think it's funny how many people play this and take lessons away that they use for the rest of their life. I know you went to the game creator of a different RPG, RuneQuest. You marked up the whole thing and created edits, and to this day your name is listed as a contributor in RuneQuest, which actually is pretty awesome. I get amazing show ideas from fans all the time. Our most popular episodes are often just me giving advice from Feedback Friday, and that's a fan idea. Let's see what we can take from this next clip.
Reid's thirst for adventure grew. He recruited a band of classmates and took on the role of game master himself. He was now responsible for creating and running a fantasy world, a world in which his friends were spending more and more time. Reid soon realized this involved more than coming up with fantastical situations and presiding over geeky dice rolls.
As part of it, you also wanted to have people feel like they kind of earned their heroism. So what they did is they would have a difficult challenge. They'd have something they'd really have to figure out. It would take effort, and they might not get it right, and you had to make sure they didn't die, because no one likes to be in the story where, like, oh, you all died, right? But that struggle, you would set that up with some depth to it so that people would enjoy the path for figuring out how they could be heroes.
It's interesting because by your description, it is very much a game of complex human motivations. What did you learn about human motivation playing Dungeons and Dragons?
I did learn that people wanted to be the hero of their own story, that was a fundamental kind of human drive across, almost everybody. I learned that kids tend to be a little simplistic and shallow, so their definition of heroism has kind of a pretty simple, like, hit dragon with sword. Now that gets richer for some of us as we get older.
I suspect there have been moments as a CEO and investor when you longed for the days when people were as simple as just wanting to kill something with a sword.
Yes, although sometimes all you have to do is scratch at it to figure out where that is. Very often, people's motives have a fairly simple character. Like, I want to be the important person who solved that problem. I want to have the credit for it. And it was like, well, actually, in fact, there were 5 of us, right, who were all working on it, who all contributed a component. And yes, your component was important, but your weird behavior is because you're trying to kind of assert that claim. Life is a team sport, not an individual sport. And once you start thinking that way, everything goes a lot better.
It's funny how human motivation can really parallel something like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. The team sport angle makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering what else you learned about working with others from these sort of old school RPGs.
Well, so, one of the things, which is the title of that Master the Scale episode is Make Everyone a Hero, is that part of how a team comes together is everyone wants to feel that their part, their role, their contribution is meaningful. And so composing a good team, whether it's the team of your own personal board of directors, the team that you're working on in an organization, is that does everyone go, yeah, I'm a hero here, and they're bought into that hero role. And so part of what I found in playing RuneQuest, which I played, much more than I played D&D, but, played both, was that where everyone had a magical experience and it was reinforcing. So say you had 4 players and you were there as a game master, and where, the 5, 1 + 1 + 1 was like 20, not 5, it was like, oh yeah, that was great. And this was great too. And everyone was like, and we were all there heroes together. And the more that you can make this happen, I think the better delight everyone has and the more massive increase of value. And the geeky technical term for this is to try to seek playing non-zero sum games, right? There's this notion of zero sum is, well, one of us wins, one of us loses. It's a fixed pot, what do you get, what do I get? The more that you can be in life circumstances where when we all play this, the pot grows, we all win more, that's a much better place to be.
That makes sense. Yeah, the zero-sum game, we see it a lot in diplomacy, politics. Like, okay, I'm going to lose, but you're going to lose more, so we're good.
Yes.
Or I'm going to win, but it has to be at your expense. Not a great way to make friends or do business, actually.
Or have a quality life.
Right. Yeah. It's very sort of Machiavelli, but old school version. Working with some of the high-level executives, maybe egos that are present in Silicon Valley, how do you get those types of people to play on a team when it seems like a lot of accolades just go to the loudest person gunning for credit?
So, a lot depends on the specifics of the circumstance in this one. There are various ways. Usually the mistake is to try to explicitly just go, wait a minute, this is my credit, this is my thing. Because then usually it sets the wrong dynamic. Part of it is you recognize it's a multi-transaction game, so you go, oh, that didn't work out this well. So next time I'm going to angle a little bit better to make sure that the credit is delivered. Sometimes you could do, it takes extra work, but you can like write a report or a memo saying, oh, here's how things, and you kind of state it in the way that you're looking at it. Sometimes you go, well, the recognition of credit really matters to this specific person, like the boss or so forth, and you can sit down and go, I felt a little awkward and I didn't know what the right way to be a good team player was, but I felt like maybe I should get a little bit more credit for this kind of thing because of X, Y, and Z. And the real audience that mattered was the boss's opinion. And the boss goes, oh, well, you handled it socially appropriately rather than making a big scene at the office, possibly breaking team dynamics. You came to me, you expressed it in a way that was partially a question. Like, I kind of thought that I thought, internally, I felt like I deserved more credit, but I'm asking you about it because I'd like your feedback on this, and here's why. And they go, oh, great. And they could say, then they may tell you, well, actually, the credit should be more distributed the following way. And you go, okay, I learned something. Maybe I disagree with you, but I hear how you're looking at this, and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of specifics that really matter. Probably the real take home is don't just try to go beat the drum louder. Try to maneuver so that the credit is kind of shown rather than you're telling people.
Gotcha.
And to identify which audiences really matter versus the whole world, because the which audiences is an easier problem.
Yeah, that's true, right? Like if everyone in the boardroom knows that you took point on it, but the public face says, look at what this team did, it kind of doesn't matter if your goal is, look, I'm just trying to do good things for my venture capital firm. I don't care if Twitter knows that this was my idea.
Exactly.
Yeah. Coming up here, we have Brit Morin, founder of Brit & Co. And this is a founder that's just killed it, mostly talking to and working with millennials. And what stands out for me in this clip is this concept of tours of duty. I'd like to talk about that as well. Here's the clip.
For me, passion in the workplace isn't something that can be bought. All the back rubs and bento boxes in the world aren't going to help your employees feel fulfilled if their goals are fundamentally different to yours. Instilling true passion is about aligning goals. And while it is true that this will encourage loyalty or retention or whatever you want to call it, you have to realize that goals change. The alignments can drift apart until they are following separate courses. And this is certainly not unique to millennials.
We're always aware that oftentimes people might leave the company to take a whole different type of spin at a new career. We've had people leave to become nurses and yoga instructors and to start companies of their own. And to be honest, we just agree that that's normal for this generation and that we have to always be open to the idea of hiring replacements for many of our employees because at the end of the day, our average tenure is about 2.5 years, which is sad but true to believe.
Here's where I disagree with Brit. A 2.5-year tenure is only sad if your expectations are wrong. Think of it as a tour of duty. You agree to work together for the length of a particular project, or for as long as the evolution makes sense. The only thing you have to be careful about is being true to your word. When you sign up for a tour of duty, you finish it.
So this is an area of friction for the older generation, and a lot of millennials sort of butt heads on this. Because my parents or someone my parents' age, common topic of the day, nobody could stick with anything anymore. Everyone's always moving around. These kids can't hold jobs for more than 4 years. I was at Ford for 32 years or whatever. But it's not quite accurate. There's something else going on here. tell us why should we not be upset that people are switching jobs so often or that they're moving around so much?
So this is, first book was Startup U, second book is The Alliance. This is part of what I was writing about in The Alliance. And part of it was, it's no longer a career ladder. It's no longer a career escalator. It's a jungle gym, right?
Yeah.
And a jungle gym is you're kind of going sideways, you're going down, you're going up. It's like kind of all over. And that's the nature of modern work. And so I think that and actually, by the way, the whole world's better off for it. The world's better off individuals. They can have essentially multiple careers, right, in kind of different ways. They can learn and stay fresh and be interesting. Businesses can be infused with new talent, with bold ideas and different learnings from different areas and kind of adjust how they think of the market, how they play, how they operate. It's one of the things that makes Silicon Valley magical because actually, in fact, people move around from companies a lot. And so all of the companies are fiercely learning machines because they're all learning together through the exchanges of these biological parts that go, oh, I learned this and now I moved over here and I'm not taking any confidential information, but I did take what I learned and I'm applying it over here. And that sharing of information is super important. And, part of it is there's this kind of like, think of how foolish it is to say, well, I'm 20 and I've picked the exact right thing for me for the next 45 years. Like, really? You don't think you're going to learn anything in the next 45 years? You think you did all your learning where you're 20 and you're done, right? And the world's not changing and all the rest. So it's a good thing. The important thing, and this is part of the alliance in the book, was to say, actually, in fact, staying synced and being forthright and being well allied with the companies you're at, with the managers you're working with, is super important because you can say, look, what's the magical thing that I can accomplish by working here, such that you think that was a good tour of duty, like, and what's that thing? And let's agree on that. Let me do that, and that's part of what I contribute as part of this being a significant and interesting part of my career path. And then vice versa of, okay, what's the thing how do I get transformed to this? How does this help amplify my career? And maybe it'll end up being here my entire life. Great, awesome. And maybe it won't, and that should be great too.
I think the advantages are pretty clear, and I know there are different types of tours of duty. We'll get to those in the next clip, but I'm wondering if there are any limitations we should be aware of. And which do you prefer to see, for example, inside your own companies? Do you love it when people are doing tours of duty, or are you like, look, I'd like to ideally retain people for longer?
Well, the greater percentage of people that are retained for longer is better for the company for sure. They have a depth of knowledge, so they may, like having worked there 8 years, they understand a bunch of things that have been tried or not. They're cultural standard bearers. They're more aligned with the mission of the company and what they're doing. So that is a useful thing. Now, if that was 100%, usually that's a problem because then you're not getting new blood, you're not getting new ideas. So it isn't that the goal is 100%, but a significant group of people who go, this is something I'm doing for multiple tours of duty, something that is really valuable to me, and the company should try to work in a way to make that the case, that it's valuable for the individuals. Because, by the way, they're also thinking, well, how does my life work out and so forth? And if it's staying here long at the company, it's great for the company, but only indifferent for me. How does that work?
Yeah.
Right? It should be an aligned set of interests. And so the company needs to be working on it. The individuals need to be working on it. But it is useful to have a group of people we are long timers at the company. And frequently when you look at the exec staffs of most really well-run companies, occasionally executives are hired in from the outside. That's, again, fresh blood, new ideas is useful. But usually a bulk of them tend to be promoted up from within the company because they have that depth of knowledge, they have that depth of expertise. And that's one of the things that's useful to think about is if I'm starting out my career, it's like, well, actually, in fact, I really love Netflix. I really love LinkedIn. I really love, whichever the company might be. And okay, I may iterate my way through this. And of course, I'll stay flexible. Maybe something else is the right thing at some point. But maybe it's a sequence of tour of duties right here at this one company.
If I'm listening to this and I want to do more tour of duty-like work, how do you recommend that I bring this up with the companies that I work with? Because it might be a little bit like, wait, are they leaving? I don't get what they want to work on a project basis. Like, does that mean they're transitioning out?
In the Alliance, we recommend the manager bring it up because they have a little bit more of a position of power. But say you're an individual and you're working for someone and you feel like you have, because as we described, it's a dishonest connection because you're You're not actually talking about the elephant in the room, which is maybe I'm going to go somewhere else. The best way to do it is say, look, I love this company. I love the mission. Like, it would be awesome for me if it worked out that I was working here for 20 years or a long time. I would love that. That's great. But it's also possible that it won't be the case, right? It's possible that, you guys don't think that I'm the right fit for the next progression. Like when I think it's time for me to be promoted or take on a different responsibility, that job doesn't exist here, or you guys don't think I'm the right fit. That could happen, right? And so I want to be clear about talking both about the opportunities here at this company and the other opportunities. And if you do that as the overall frame, you're taking away those backdrop of, oh, are you telling me you're leaving? Are you telling me you're not loyal to me? Are you telling me you don't care about our mission? Are you telling me I can't depend upon you to accomplish a thing that I'm looking to do? And you could answer all of those up front, saying, look, I'm committed to, I want to make this project work and so forth. And then you can then have a constructive conversation. So if you're in that employee position, bringing up the conversation, that's the way I recommend you do it.
Perfect. As promised, I'm interested in these different types of tours of duty. Here's the clip explaining these.
Reid developed the idea of the Jedi tours of duty along with his book, The Alliance. He says there are 3 different tours of duty: rotational, transformational, and foundational. Each maps onto a Star Wars character, and probably some colleagues of yours. I asked Reid to take us through the 3 archetypes.
The first was rotational, which is kind of you're a hired gun, you're doing the work, you're not really tied to the mission. That was Han Solo. The second was a transformational tour of duty, which is how both you as an individual, as an employee, are transformed, and how you also transform the organization. Of course, that's Luke Skywalker, just beginning his Jedi journey. And then the foundational tour of duty is where your mission is so closely aligned with the organization that the organization is part of your own mission as an individual. And that's the foundational tour of duty, where your life's mission is part of growing in the impact of the organization. That's Princess Leia's tour of duty.
The Star Wars metaphor is funny, but it's also deeply useful for anyone assembling a team. It gives you a framework for thinking not just about what you could get from this new team member, but what they get from
Tours
you.
of duty. How do we know what type of tour of duty we're looking for? Or is that more up to the company and the manager, and we're just sort of a tourist of duty?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's funny. I haven't heard that. Tourist of duty is a good idea. It's a match, right? So generally speaking, I think the initial focus of your career when you're starting should be transformational, because you're learning yourself, you're figuring out what's out there in the market, you're figuring out how it plays. You may get to a place where you go, oh my gosh, the mission of this organization, this is my mission. This is the mission that I can't see myself wanting to do something else. And by the way, that can change back too, but then you switch to the foundational mission. And by the way, that has to be generally, you have to see eye to eye with the company, eye to eye with your manager on that. But you can be expressing it that way. And then rotational tours of duty are fairly straightforward, which is like, well, this is actually in fact a kind of a more of a plug and play job. And so even though I may be thinking about this is what I want to be doing for a very long time, I'm simply going to be in that rotational tour for a long time, whether it's a barista or a driver or something else, and that's fine. But you should realize where you are.
This next idea is one that'll be familiar to most of us. Work-life balance is the most important thing to some folks. Talk about buzzwordy, trending things right now. Others, it's highly controversial. It might be a little overrated. Let's dive in.
Before I go further, I have to admit, I'm a very flawed spokesperson on this particular theory. I have at times used the phrase, sleep is for the weak. But in my defense, I was being somewhat tongue-in-cheek. Well, for the most part. I don't really think sleep is a sign of weakness. If I know that I have a particularly creative project coming up, I'll make sure I get 8 hours of sleep the night before. But a younger, less wise me would often limit sleep to continue the thrill of the entrepreneurial chase. Those super late-nighters to ship a new product are far behind me. But I can't deny I look back on those days with a hint of fond romanticism, as do many of my previous guests on Masters of Scale.
They had told me, like, look, leave at 6 p.m. because we don't know when you'll ever leave at 6 p.m. again.
I literally lay on the floor of the lobby and I use my backpack as a pillow.
I did sleep outside of the conference room for a few nights.
I remember, people were like sleeping under the desks.
I was coding all night, trying to be CEO in the day, and once in a while would squeeze in a shower.
Striking the balance between work and rejuvenation is something I still struggle with. My good friend, Joey Ito, will tell you so. Joey is the director of the MIT Media Lab. Here's what he told one of our producers when they interviewed him about my idea of letting fires burn.
So the only concern I have for Reid is that this notion of letting fires burn isn't the greatest philosophy for having a work-life balance. And I think that's something that Reid is now just starting to process. So on the one hand, I think he's the master of scaling, but on the other hand, I think he's just beginning to figure out how that ties into sort of taking care of himself and his life.
In fact, it's my conversations on this subject with Joey and other entrepreneurs that has got me thinking more seriously about this question of wellness, not just when it comes to the individual, but how it can be scaled throughout a company in a measurable way that boosts the bottom line.
So sleep is for the weak, huh?
So you have to understand what game you're playing. There are games you can play with work-life balance. That's what you want to do. Great, right? Like no harm, no foul, good thing to do. If you're doing a startup, which is the metaphor I use, is you're jumping off a cliff, assembling an airplane on the way down, you're all in. There is no work-life balance there. It's you assemble the plane or you crash on the ground. And so at that point, yes, you need to rest enough that you can play. It's a marathon, not just a sprint, that you can play that out. But that's where you kind of go, okay, I am playing this as hard as possible. Now, the sleep is for the weak is kind of a fun metaphor. I'm actually, I think making intelligent decisions is really key to how you learn and do everything else. And you need to be getting enough sleep that you're cognitively functional, that you're making decisions the right way. So it isn't, oh yeah, stay up 2 nights, that's great. It's like, no. It's a marathon, and your cognitive processing and the decisions you're making are super important.
The more I research this and talk to people about it, the more the research shows that people are actually happier when they have some sort of balance. But they're happier kind of in the moment where that balance exists, of course. But there are people who are the most successful economically, and they typically on our show say, look, at no time in my 20s and 30s did I have any sort of work-life balance. This isn't universally true, but Scott Galloway, who's a professor at Stern, he said, look, forget it. If you want balance before your 40s, that's fine. But you might have to accept that you won't be as economically successful as people that just burned it for 20 years and were like obsessed with every business that they were in and slept in the office. And it's an uncomfortable truth because I'm from the Wall Street background, so I'm fully familiar with supplementing your diet with Red Bull and sleeping upright in a chair in front of an Excel spreadsheet. But a lot of people are like, no, it's not fair. I should have balance and I should still be able to be successful. But it's kind of like follow your passion, where some people do it and then they talk about how great that is. And other people go, wait a minute, I come home every day, I still work 6 days a week and I'm not seeing it. How come do I really have to have 80-hour work weeks? So it's a competitive world. What's your differentiation? The other people are working 80-hour weeks and you're working 40 and you think you're gonna win, that you'd better be lucky or amazingly good. Sure. Or both. Probably both, yeah.
Yes, right. So you got to think about it. Like everyone wants to have high, or many people, the majority of people want to have a high economic success, so they're kind of competing for it. And you have to think about it as a competition, which means like it's the person who goes and says, oh, I'm going to be a star basketball player and I'm not going to practice. Oh, really? No. Actually, in fact, you have to commit. You have to put in the time. You have to put in the energy, the blood, sweat, and tears. That's what it takes. Now, the only thing I'd say to kind of slightly soften that is people tend to say work-life balance. Hey, I'm, I go home at 5. I've got every evening. I got all my hobbies and all the rest. Or, oh my God, I'm sleeping at the office. Think about it as kind of like maybe more times a little bit closer to them sleeping in the office, but think about like, okay, what can I do to make the marathon work for me? Well, I do get sleep. I do get enough sleep. Like maybe I'm getting 7 versus 8 hours, right? But I am getting enough sleep, and I take small breaks. Like, okay, Saturday afternoons, I go do something that just totally delights me, and I make sure that that's sacrosanct every time I get to Saturday, and then I'm working. And that's what I was doing when I was doing startups. I was like, okay, it isn't 7 days, nothing matters. It's how do you have one thing that kind of recharges you a little bit? And it doesn't mean that you aren't like, oh my God, I'm just working so hard. Of course you are. But you can do that little thing that keeps your batteries charged enough.
So I'm digging this format with the clips, but I do want to transition to some good old-fashioned conversation here before we wrap. I heard as a kid you used to go to the library and just read one book, finish it, pull another one off the shelf. I mean, you're either a fast reader or you spend a lot of time in the library, or probably both.
Both.
Yeah. You originally wanted to be the director of the CIA? That seems a little... What was the thought process behind that?
That's a very funny, deep historical clip. So I was confronted with the fact that, and this is, being a kid who was reading military history and history of the world and all the rest, those were the bouquet book. I was curious about the world and the world around me, and that happened to be the section of the library I found. And I realized at 9 or something, some young age, that part of the suffering that happened is nations would get into conflict and wars would happen, and wars were massive amounts of suffering. And I was like, well, how do you stop wars, right? Like, how do you get it so no wars happen? I was like, well, actually, in fact, if nations are knowledgeable and don't make accidents and understand what's going on and understand that peace is better for them broadly, and then kind of adjust for that, that would be the way to do that. Well, how could I help with that? Well, I could be the director of the CIA, because then I could help the information being the right information that would then happen, and that would make the world a more peaceful place. Oh, maybe I should do that.
Okay.
That was the logic.
It's still it's pretty sound. Yeah. I mean, it's not totally off, I think. Yeah. It's like and I know your friends had different positions, right? You had kind of like your teenage Avengers with your friends. One was a president, one was the CEO of IBM, which is a funny world. You're thinking, all right, director of the CIA, president of the United States, CEO of IBM. I guess back then, though.
Back then, IBM was the big tech company.
That was like, look, I'm going to be, one of you has to be Jeff Bezos or something, like whatever the modern day
exactly.
equivalent.
And so, it's kind of like we're going to go do this. And of course, this is more youthful fancy.
Sure, yeah. But it seems like you wanted to be a connector early on. There was some idealism there, obviously. This is sort of related, but maybe not, and feel free we can not answer this too. There's something called the Bilderberg Group that seems very international, but when I Googled it, people are this is like Illuminati conspiracy theory pit. What is that?
So it's a group of people who gather together to try to figure out what might go wrong with the kind of peaceful global, kind of society, the kind of trade and everything else. And it's more like identifying risk, like could you have financial system collapse and that kind of thing. And I find kind of funny, because I've seen all the Illuminati threads as well. People like John Micklethwait, the former editor-in-chief of The Economist and now editor-in-chief of Bloomberg. These people whose careers would be made by reporting on the Illuminati are there. They're in the room. So it's not the Illuminati.
Right, yeah.
Right? They insist on confidential conversations because part of what happens is, say, for example, you're talking about, well, here's how a risk on a run on the banking system might happen. And here's how we might have financial system collapse in region X of the world. Well, you don't want to be like saying that out in public to the world because you don't want to have a bad actor be able to do something. You may not want to create panic, because, by the way, part of it is confidence that the system's working is what happens, like run-ons a bank. You wouldn't want to do that kind of thing. So they insist on confidentiality, right, for that basis. And that's the reason. And then other people say, well, I should know. It's like, well, but look, there's 8 billion people in the world. What we want to do is identify the risk, have the system be able to go fix the risk before there's any awareness of it, and then we're great. It's just like cybersecurity. You don't say, oh, by the way, here's the hole that anyone can get into anyone's Gmail account. No. We don't publicize that. We fix it first.
Right. That makes sense. So if you're in there and it's not closed door and you're saying, hey, by the way, we're using old software in all our power grid systems, somebody's like, ding. Right. Yes. So that makes sense. It makes sense as far as a practical impact on society. I think whenever you have guys like you and Eric Schmidt and the, King of Denmark or whatever in a room, and it's like, hey, we don't talk about what happens there. It's just ripe for Reddit going bananas.
And it's classic when you think about what are the other reasons you might have a confidential conversation that are not like we're there.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's a bunch of journalists in the room. Their economic incentive, their publicity incentive is if there's anything untoward, that makes their careers.
Right. That makes sense. What's the next chapter for you? A lot of people want to know what people with your level of resources are going to do with like the second half of your life.
So I think it's always good to be thinking like, what's the next interesting thing to accomplish, the next thing to do that delights you, that the world could use or need. You have some theory of that. And so, for me, it obviously goes into what are the things I can do in philanthropy. And I've been doing stuff in artificial intelligence and philanthropy, help launch the Stanford Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Institute recently, it's like about a month ago. Maybe it's 2 months ago now, time compression. And then there's, things around, where can I take the things that I've learned, like for example, in tech investing and help the world in various ways. So like change.org is one of the things I invested in, because it's like, how do you speak humanity to power when that power is governments and corporations, and say, no, be more human, right? And that could be the internet treasure that does that for decades, hundreds of years, whatever the length of time of these organizations is. And those kinds of things are the kinds of things that have already been part of the last decade, but grow and amplify in the next decade or two.
You do have a lot of resources. What's something that you'd hypothetically get for your kids or kids that are close to you and your family and think, okay, this is going to give these children a huge advantage in the future? It doesn't have to be something you buy or pay for, but I think a lot of folks go, oh, well, these people all have these advantages. But I'm often asking people this, and the advantage is not like send them to a $200,000 a year private school. It's like get them involved in STEM early or something very simple.
So I think the best thing you can do to help kids is to help them experience delight on some of the things that could be useful paths to them. So like, one of my investments is this company called Aurora, which is self-driving cars. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and her nephew is coming over from France, and it was like, what should we do when the nephew comes over from France to be useful in Silicon Valley? I was like, well, maybe I can get the nephew a ride in the Aurora car. And it's like, oh my God, this is what the future looks like. And that could be it could be really exciting to be involved in these kinds of technologies and this kind of technological future. And if you have that kind of excitement, then it sets you on that kind of path. So it's like, what kinds of experiences can you help people have? Conversations, learnings that would go, ooh, that's a good anchor moment in what could be a really useful path to go down. And I think those kinds of things are frequently underrated.
So basically get them inspired or open to possibility early so that their thinking changes even 1 degree. But since it's so early, that becomes, it's like steering the ship 1 degree out of port.
And realize what's possible.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. People must spend tons of time and effort trying to get your attention. I can only imagine. What are some of the best ways to get busy people like yourself to pay attention to their communication?
So the thing I always recommend, because it really is the basic, is to get referred by someone who I know and trust.
Yeah.
Right? Because like everyone goes, wow, what if I put this compelling thing in the cold email, this compelling thing in the cold email? Yes, one of the 200 that arrived today that I probably don't even look at.
Sure.
Right? So you go, okay, that doesn't really work that way. I've had people wait outside this office and approach me as I'm coming out, and I'm like,
scary.
Okay, I don't know the difference between you and a sociopath.
Right.
Like it's bad. Right? So I'm not going to talk to you in this context. So a warm intro is really the best possible thing. Right? And so, and then the other thing is, everyone tends to go to the highest rung in the celebrity ladder. They tend to go to how do I talk to Bill Gates? Oh my gosh, the millions, the billions of people that want to talk to Bill Gates. Go, okay, who's the person who could be really helpful that's actually within my sphere? That sure, they're like an important, successful person and everyone else, but they could be helpful to me, and really look for that person.
Yeah, good point. You don't really need Bill Gates or Reid Hoffman to say, this is a good app idea. You need somebody who's built an app before of even just mild success.
Exactly.
Right. You're right. People go straight to the top. Jordan, I need to talk to you. Should I start a podcast? I don't know.
Yes.
How should I launch mine? I did mine 12 years ago. I'm the worst person to ask. But start 12 years ago is usually a good tip, and then go from there. I mean, I'm really not the person to ask about that sort of thing, so I definitely can identify with that. Last but not least, you've mentioned that you would eventually, someday maybe, like to rewrite Machiavelli, The Prince, for modern-day Silicon Valley. What would some of the big changes be from that book?
So So the notion, when Machiavelli wrote The Prince, there's a lot of scholarship and a lot of contention about what he was trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
But he was basically trying to say, here is the things that as a key advisor to these powerful Italian families, what is the thing that they should recognize and why people like me or me should be identified as a key advisor. And he was right about this kind of almost state of warfare between the different areas where they also needed to have their people like them within their city-state.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the parallel is we have all these massive tech companies where these massive tech companies are powers in the world. They're not this overblown, like, oh, Google is more powerful than countries. No, it's not. Right? Almost all of the big major countries, they have armies,
right.
They have police forces, they have, there's a lot of things where they're a lot more powerful.
Maybe Liechtenstein. They kind of beat Liechtenstein.
Okay, Liechtenstein. And if the interesting question is the percentage of people listening to this podcast or watching this video would know where it is intrinsically without looking it up.
Yeah.
And so now, but the thing is that these are in fact like city-states. They are in fact there's an internal group that's really important to keep connected, and yet you have to understand that there's this competition, this conflict between these companies and other kinds of interests. And how do you reorient that? Now, part of my interest in doing that is to not just take Machiavelli's The Prince and the Discourses are kind of the textbook of sociopathic, no morals matter. Part of my interest in rewriting it is to say, actually, how do you rewrite it when you say, actually, the moral compasses do matter? You still have to be realpolitik, but realpolitik with moral compasses. And that's the thing that has intrigued me on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I was going to say, okay, you're big on connection and friendship. That sort of is un-Machiavelli as maybe it gets.
Yes.
So, right. So the realpolitik with a moral compass.
Exactly.
Well, I'm looking forward to that book someday.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Reid, thank you very much.
Pleasure.